A man is drinking wine, handed to him by a woman he's just met. His crew are already gone, turned into pigs, screaming in a voice that's still half human, locked in a sty behind her palace. He knows this. He drinks anyway. That man is Odysseus, and for 3,000 years, history has remembered the woman who poured that wine as a monster. It remembers him as a hero. But watch what actually happens in the next 5 minutes of this story, and the label starts to wobble. One of Odysseus's men, Eurylochus, never drank the wine. He watched his friends turn into pigs from the doorway and ran. He finds Odysseus on the beach and tells him everything. Odysseus draws his sword and marches alone toward the palace to get his men back. On the road, a god intercepts him, Hermes, warning him what's coming and handing him a plant called moly, the one thing that can block Circe's power. Odysseus walks in, drinks the wine himself, and when Circe raises her wand on him exactly as she did on his crew, nothing happens. Now watch this moment closely, because it's the hinge the whole video turns on. Circe doesn't call for help. She falls to her knees in front of him and invites him into her bed. And Odysseus, sword still in hand, says no. Not until she swears an oath in front of the gods that she won't harm him once he's disarmed and vulnerable. She swears it. Only then does anything happen between them. Only after that does she turn his men back into people. That's a strange scene to build a monster out of. A woman overpowered in her own home, negotiating for her life with the one weapon she has left, agreeing to a demand from an armed stranger. So here's the question worth sitting with before we go further. Why does the word that survives from this encounter belong to her and not to him? Zoom out, and this isn't an isolated case. In Homer's Odyssey, a striking number of the obstacles standing between Odysseus and home are women who answer to no man. Circe on her island, Calypso on hers, the sirens on their rocks, and, in the wider tradition around the poem, Scylla, once a woman herself before something turned her into 6 shrieking mouths. This is a world where a woman's worth was measured almost entirely by whose household she belonged to, a father's, then a husband's. A woman who lived alone on her own island, answering to nobody, wasn't just unusual in that world. She was a walking exception to the entire system Greek audiences believed held their society together. Not every threat in this story is female. Poseidon hunts Odysseus across the entire sea out of a personal grudge, and the Cyclops Polyphemus eats his men raw in front of him. But notice the difference in how the poem talks about them. Polyphemus is a brute. Poseidon is a wrathful god, owed respect even in his cruelty. Neither one gets remembered 3,000 years later as a seductress. That word gets reserved for something more specific. A woman whose danger comes bundled with a bed a man chose to climb into and later needed an explanation for. It's worth watching for exactly where that word shows up and where it doesn't. Circe, once the oath is sworn, stops behaving like anyone's idea of a monster. She hosts Odysseus and his men for a full year, feeding them, healing them, asking nothing more of them than company. Homer even lets a full year pass almost gently, feasting, wine, a household running smoothly around a woman who, by every measure the culture had, shouldn't have been able to run one alone. When it's finally time to leave, she's the one who tells him exactly how to survive the siren's song, the one who tells him precisely how to thread the strait between Scylla and Charybdis, and warns him it's better to lose 6 men to the monster than risk the whole ship in the whirlpool. She's the one who sends him to the edge of the underworld to get the prophecy he needs to ever see home again. Cut Circe out of this story, and Odysseus never makes it back. And yet, of every figure in the poem, hero or monster, human or god, she's the one whose name became shorthand for witch. Calypso's story looks similar on the surface. Her island, too, is described in loving detail. Soft meadows, fragrant cypress and cedar smoke drifting from her cave, birdsong, a spring splitting into 4 separate streams. Homer spends real time making this place sound like paradise. But here's where the poem itself won't let us tell the rest of her story the same way we told Circe's. Book 5 opens not with Odysseus talking, but with the gods in council, arguing about him. Athena tells the assembled gods that Calypso is holding him against his will, refusing to let him go. Zeus sends Hermes down personally to order her to release him. And when we finally see Odysseus himself, he's sitting on the rocks at the edge of Calypso's island, in tears, staring out at the sea he's not allowed to cross. Calypso comes to him every night. He goes to her unwillingly. The poem is direct about this. It isn't ambiguous, and it isn't Odysseus's version of events. It's the narrator's. So this isn't a story about a comfortable 7 years he simply chose to walk away from. It's a captivity, described as one, by name, before Odysseus has said a single word about it himself. That matters, and it's worth not softening. But, and this is the part that makes Calypso genuinely harder to sum up than a simple villain, the poem also hands her one of its most honest lines. When Hermes arrives with Zeus's order, Calypso doesn't just obey quietly. She fires back, furious, pointing out that male gods take mortal lovers constantly and face nothing for it, while a goddess who does the same is punished and shamed into giving him up. That complaint isn't wrong. Nothing in the poem answers it. It just sits there, true, right next to a woman who is, at the same time, keeping a man from his home and his wife against his will. That's the real shape of Calypso's story. A legitimate grievance and a real captivity, in the same character at the same time. The poem doesn't resolve that tension. It just lets both things be true and moves on. Set both women against Penelope back in Ithaca, and the pattern the poem is running gets clearer. Penelope has spent 20 years managing a household alone, fending off more than 100 suitors camped in her own halls, eating her stores and courting her hand, while her son grows up without a father in the house. Her one real weapon is a trick, unraveling her loom work every night, undoing by moonlight what she wove by day, buying time on a decision she isn't fully free to make on her own terms. She has no island, no power outside a husband's household, and no scene where the narrator steps outside Odysseus's story to show us what she's actually feeling, the way Calypso briefly gets in Book 5. She's the version of a woman this poem is fully comfortable with, patient, contained, dependent, waiting inside someone else's house. Circe and Calypso, ruling their own ground and answering to no household, don't get that comfort. One gets turned into a myth about seduction by a story that isn't even hers to tell. The other gets shown to us clearly, directly, as both wronged by the gods and actively wronging Odysseus at the same time, and gets remembered, in the end, as neither of those things. Later writers retelling this story, centuries after Homer, mostly dropped the complexity entirely and kept only the word that stuck: witch. Everything converges at the moment Odysseus finally leaves. It doesn't happen because Calypso decides to let him go. It happens because Zeus orders it, and Calypso, after her one moment of open anger, walks Odysseus to the tree line herself, hands him an axe and adze to build his own raft, and over 4 days watches him cut and shape the timber that will carry him away from her for good. When it's finished, she stocks it with food, wine, and clothes, and sends him off with a wind she calls up specifically to speed him home. She is, in the same handful of scenes, a woman who has just lost an argument with the entire order of the gods, and the only person in this stretch of the poem shown doing Odysseus a real, costly kindness on his way out the door. And Circe, whose story is the one actually filtered through Odysseus's own retelling, gets no equivalent moment of protest at all, because we never hear her side directly. We only hear what Odysseus chose to tell a room full of strangers about a woman he once held a sword to. Here's the detail almost nobody catches on a first read, and it changes how these two stories should sit next to each other. Circe's entire encounter, the wine, the pigs, the oath, the year on her island, comes to us because Odysseus is telling it, out loud, to the Phaeacians, on his way home to a wife he's been gone from for 10 years. He is, by the poem's own opening lines, the man of many wiles, its most gifted liar, narrating his own decade of absence to an audience he badly needs on his side. Every detail about Circe survives only in his words. Calypso doesn't. Her captivity is on the page before Odysseus ever opens his mouth, narrated independently, argued over by gods who have no reason to lie about it, witnessed by no one Odysseus could have coached or charmed. Which means the two witches of this story aren't equally uncertain. One of them we should read with real suspicion, filtered through the most gifted liar Greek myth ever produced, telling his story to an audience he needed on his side. The other one, the poem confirms for us directly, with its own voice, before Odysseus is even in the room to shape the telling. And what it confirms isn't a monster. It's something harder to fit on a thumbnail. A woman holding a man against his will, telling the plain truth about the god's hypocrisy in the very same breath, building him the raft that finally sets him free with her own hands, and getting remembered 3,000 years later for none of it, only for the word later centuries decided to keep.